CEO claimed the virgin girl from the slum and turned her into a woman. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. How are you today, my sweet, amazing, and absolutely cherished people? I thank God for your lives every single day. Your presence here is not just a blessing, it's a gift. You are the heartbeat of this channel, and I carry you in my heart with so much love and gratitude. Before we begin our story, let me lift you up with a prayer straight from my soul. May your days be wrapped in comfort, may your nights be filled with restful peace, and may the love you've poured into others come back to you 1,000-fold. May you never walk alone, because you are surrounded by love, mine and God's. My precious family, how are you enjoying this journey so far? I ask because your joy matters to me. Your comments, your kind words, they fill me with purpose. But I've also noticed something. Our likes have slowed down just a bit. My beautiful ones, it takes only 2 seconds to press that like button, just 2 seconds to spread love, and it truly means more than you can imagine. So tell me, how many of you have been riding with us from the start? I want to hear your beautiful voices. Now take a deep breath, lean back, and let's step into this brand new story, hand in hand, heart to heart, as one loving family. The rain pelted against Abby Gomez's skin like tiny needles as she struggled through the rapidly rising water. The storm had struck without warning, transforming the narrow streets of her neighborhood into raging rivers within hours. Lightning cracked across the midnight sky, illuminating the terror on her face as she watched her apartment building groan under the assault of wind and water. "Get out! Everyone get out now!" she shouted to her neighbors, her soaked t-shirt clinging to her curves as she helped an elderly woman toward higher ground. At 24, Abby had survived many hardships in this forgotten corner of the city. But nothing like this. Water had already reached her waist, the current threatening to sweep her away with each step. Another flash of lightning revealed a section of her building collapsing, and her heart sank. Everything she owned, the little she had managed to accumulate, would be gone by morning. 10 blocks away, Bill Brown cursed as his Bentley stalled in the flooded street. The 35-year-old CEO had been returning from a business dinner when the storm hit with apocalyptic fury. Now stranded, he watched through the windshield as the water level rose around his luxury vehicle. "Damn it," he muttered, loosening his Italian silk tie and assessing his options. Stay in the car and risk drowning, or brave the storm and find shelter. The decision was made for him when water began seeping through the door seals. Bill abandoned the Bentley, his tall, muscular frame fighting against the wind as he sought higher ground. His expensive suit was ruined within seconds, plastered against his broad shoulders and strong chest as he pushed forward. The screams reached him before he saw her. A woman's voice, desperate and determined, rising above the howl of the storm. Bill followed the sound until he spotted Abby, now trapped between a collapsed section of road and the rising water. "Hold on!" he shouted, though his voice was nearly lost in the roar of thunder. Abby turned, seeing only the silhouette of a man approaching through the curtain of rain. Fear flashed through her. Women in her neighborhood knew to be wary of strange men, especially in vulnerable situations. But as another section of her building collapsed behind her, she realized she had no choice. Bill reached her, his strong arms encircling her waist as he pulled her away from the crumbling structure. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his face inches from hers. Abby looked up, momentarily stunned by the intensity of his blue eyes. Water streamed down his chiseled features, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Even drenched and disheveled, he exuded confidence and authority, a man completely out of place in her world. "My home," she managed, pointing to the collapsing building. "Everything I own." "Forget about that," Bill commanded, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. "We need shelter, now." The authority in his tone should have angered her. Abby had spent her life fighting against men who thought they could tell her what to do. But something in his eyes spoke of concern rather than control, and she found herself nodding. "There's an abandoned warehouse on higher ground," she said, pointing through the deluge. "This way." They fought through the storm together, Bills, and never leaving the small of her back as he guided her through the treacherous streets. Twice he caught her as she stumbled, his strong arms keeping her from being swept away by the current. By the time they reached the warehouse, they were both gasping for breath. The abandoned building offered little comfort, just a roof and dry floor, but it was salvation compared to the chaos outside. Abby collapsed against a wall, her entire body trembling with cold and adrenaline. Without the rain washing them away, she became acutely aware of how her soaked clothes revealed every curve of her body. Bill seemed to notice too, his eyes briefly traveling over her form before he respectfully looked away. "We need to get warm," he said matter-of-factly, shrugging out of his sodden jacket. "Hypothermia is a real risk." Abby wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly shy. "I'm fine." "You're shaking," he countered, approaching her slowly. "Body heat. It's our only option right now." He sat beside her, and despite her initial reluctance, Abby found herself drawn to his warmth. When he cautiously put his arm around her shoulders, she didn't pull away. "I'm Bill," he said softly. "Bill Brown." "Abby Gomez," she replied, trying to ignore how her body responded to his proximity. His cologne, expensive and masculine, still clung to his skin beneath the smell of rain. "Thank you for helping me find shelter," he said, his breath warm against her ear. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the warehouse in stark white light. In that brief moment, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. A recognition, a possibility, a danger. "What were you doing in this neighborhood?" Abby asked, trying to distract herself from the warmth of his body against hers. "You don't belong here." Bill laughed, a rich sound that seemed to vibrate through her. "My car had other ideas, probably totaled now." "Poor you," Abby said with a hint of sarcasm. "One less luxury car in your collection." Instead of taking offense, Bill smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "You think I have a collection? Men like you always do? Men like me?" His voice dropped lower, an intimate rumble in the darkness. "And what kind of man am I, Abby Gomez?" The way he said her name sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Rich, powerful, used to getting what you want." His arm tightened slightly around her. "And what about women like you?" "Women like me survive," she answered simply. "We don't have the luxury of wanting." The rain continued to pound against the roof, but inside the warehouse a different kind of storm was brewing. As the night grew colder, they moved closer together, the boundaries between them dissolving with each passing hour. Abby told herself it was just for warmth, just for survival, but her racing heart suggested otherwise. By dawn, they were entwined in a way that went beyond mere necessity, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. They had talked through the night, sharing stories that surprised them both with their honesty. Bill spoke of the loneliness of success, while Abby revealed the daily struggles of her life in the slums. When morning light filtered through the broken windows, Abby looked up to find Bill watching her, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't name. "The storm's passed," she whispered, making no move to leave his embrace. "Has it?" Bill asked softly, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered on her cheek, and Abby felt her breath catch. For one suspended moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this warehouse, this man, this inexplicable connection that had formed in the midst of chaos. Then reality intruded. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the spell was broken. Abby pulled away first, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their position. "I should go check on my neighbors," she said, standing quickly. Bill rose too, his imposing height making the warehouse seem smaller. "Let me help." "You've done enough," Abby replied, moving toward the door. "I'm sure you have more important things to do than dig through mud with slum dwellers." His hand caught her wrist, gentle but insistent. "I'll find you again, Abby Gomez." The promise in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation through her body, awakening feelings she'd never experienced before. "Why would you want to?" she challenged, though her racing pulse betrayed her. Bill stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. "Because some storms change everything," he said, his eyes holding hers captive, "and I think this one just did." Chapter 2. Haunted by Desire. 3 days had passed since the storm, and Bill Brown couldn't shake the memory of Abby Gomez from his mind. Her image haunted him. Dark eyes flashing in the lightning, wet clothes clinging to curves that his hands itched to explore. The unexpected softness of her body against his as they shared warmth through the night. The connection they'd formed, in those desperate hours, felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, Bill stared unseeing at the city skyline. The storm had left devastation in its wake, particularly in the poorer neighborhoods. He'd made a sizable donation to relief efforts, but his thoughts weren't on charity. They were fixated on finding her again. "Mr. Brown, the board is waiting." His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Tell them to start without me," he replied, already reaching for his jacket. 40 minutes later, Bill's Range Rover pulled into Abby's neighborhood. The devastation was worse than he'd imagined. Buildings reduced to rubble, streets still flooded in places, people sorting through mud-soaked possessions. His luxury vehicle drew stares as he navigated the debris-filled streets. He found her exactly where his private investigator said she would be, at a makeshift community center, organizing food and supplies for displaced families. The sight of her took his breath away. Even in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, she radiated a beauty that made his chest tighten. Abby looked up, freezing when she saw him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the crowded room, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it again," she said when he approached, though her eyes betrayed her attempt at nonchalance. "I said I'd find you." Bill's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "I keep my promises." A flush crept up her neck. "Why?" Instead of answering, Bill looked around at the chaos of the relief center. "Let me help," he said, removing his designer jacket and rolling up the sleeves of his custom shirt. For hours, they worked side by side, distributing supplies and clearing debris. Bill's presence caused a stir. A billionaire CEO doing manual labor alongside slum residents was unheard of. But he ignored the whispers, focused entirely on the woman who moved with such purpose and compassion among her neighbors. As dusk fell, they found themselves alone in the storeroom, organizing the remaining supplies. "You never answered my question," Abby said softly, not looking at him. "Why did you come back?" Bill stepped closer, close enough to smell the light floral scent of her skin beneath the day's sweat and dust. "You know why." Her breath caught. "I don't. Look at me," he commanded gently. When she raised her eyes to his, the vulnerability there nearly undid him. Bill reached out, his fingers brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The simple touch sent electricity through them both. "I haven't been able to sleep," he admitted, his voice rough with desire. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you. I feel you against me in that warehouse. I hear your voice. It's driving me insane." Abby's lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling more rapidly. "That was just survival. Body heat. Is that what you tell yourself?" His fingertips traced the line of her jaw, coming to rest just beneath her chin. "Because I think we both know it was more." She didn't pull away, from his touch, but uncertainty clouded her eyes. What could someone like me possibly offer someone like you, besides the obvious? The implications stung more than Bill expected. Is that what you think I want? Just sex? Isn't it? Her challenge carried the weight of every disappointment she'd ever experienced. Bill dropped his hand, taking a step back to give her space. I want to offer you a job. The statement clearly caught her off guard. What? At Brown Enterprises, I did my research. You have a business degree from community college. You maintained a 4.0 GPA while working 2 jobs. Respect colored his tone. That kind of dedication is rare. Suspicion replaced surprise on Abby's face. You investigated me? I like to know who I'm dealing with, and what position do you have in mind for me? The double entendre wasn't lost on either of them. Bill's eyes darkened, but he kept his voice professional. Assistant manager in our community outreach department. The pay is good. Benefits include healthcare and housing allowance. Abby's expression shifted between disbelief and temptation. And what would be expected of me in return? Your skills, your time. Nothing more. He held her gaze steadily. Whatever happens between us personally would be entirely separate. She laughed, the sound both bitter and warm. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to make your own choices. Bill reached into his pocket, extracting a business card. Interview tomorrow at 10. Come or don't. Either way, I'll continue supporting the relief efforts here. He placed the card on a nearby shelf and turned to leave, though every fiber of his being screamed to stay, to pull her into his arms and claim the mouth that had been tormenting his dreams. Why are you really doing this? Abby called after him, her voice small in the dimly lit room. Bill paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. Because some people are worth pursuing, Abby Gomez. And I think you might be one of them. The next morning, Abby stood outside the imposing glass tower of Brown Enterprises, her heart pounding. She'd spent hours agonizing over the decision, ultimately borrowing a formal skirt and blouse from a friend. The clothes were slightly too large, but it was the best she could manage. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at Abby's appearance, but directed her to the executive elevator with cool professionalism. As the floors ticked by, Abby's resolve wavered. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. The elevator doors opened directly into Bill's office, a vast space of glass and steel with panoramic views of the city. And there he was, standing behind his desk, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored grey suit. The sight of him sent a wave of heat through her body, memories of their night in the warehouse flooding back with vivid intensity. "You came," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I need the job," Abby replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Nothing more." Bill motioned to the chair across from his desk. "Of course. Shall we begin the interview?" For the next hour, he questioned her about her education, experience, and ideas for community development. The conversation was entirely professional, but the undercurrent of attraction between them made every moment charged with tension. Whenever their eyes met, Abby felt a pull low in her belly, an ache she'd never experienced before. "Your qualifications are impressive," Bill concluded, setting aside his notes. "There's just one more thing I need to know." "What's that?" Abby asked, suddenly nervous under his intense gaze. Bill stood, circling the desk to lean against it directly in front of her. His proximity made her pulse race. "Why did you really come today?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Abby rose from her chair, needing to feel on equal footing. The movement brought her closer to him, too close. She could smell his cologne, could almost feel the heat radiating from his body. "I told you, I need the job." "Look me in the eye and tell me that's the only reason." Abby met his gaze, intending to repeat her claim, but the words died in her throat. The desire in his eyes mirrored her own, making lies impossible. I can't stop thinking about you either, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. About that night. The way you held me. Bill's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the desk, the simple contact sending shivers up her arm. His, fingers entwined with hers, thumb stroking her palm in slow, sensual circles. I want to be clear about something, he said, his voice husky with restraint. You have the job regardless of what happens next. Your professional future is not contingent on your personal choices. Do you understand? Abby nodded, her throat dry with anticipation. Good. Bill's free hand reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unbearably intimate. Because I very much want to kiss you right now. The confession broke, something open inside her. With a courage born of pure desire, Abby leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Then do it. His lips claimed hers with controlled passion, the kiss starting gentle but quickly deepening as 3 days of pent-up longing erupted between them. Bill's strong arms encircled her waist, drawing her between his parted legs as he remained perched on the desk. Abby's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath expensive fabric. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, the professional pretense shattered beyond repair. This is dangerous, Abby whispered, against his mouth, even as her body pressed closer to his. Bill's hands slid down to her hips, fingers digging into the soft flesh with barely restrained need. The most worthwhile things usually are. His phone buzzed on the desk, the intrusion of reality breaking the moment. With visible reluctance, Bill released her and checked the screen. The board meeting. I'm already 20 minutes late. Abby stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. What was she doing? This man could destroy her with a word, could use her and discard her like she was nothing. Yet the way he looked at her, like she was everything, made her willing to risk it all. You. Start tomorrow, Bill said, straightening his tie. 9 a.m. My assistant will show you to your office. So I got the job. A smile tugged at Abby's lips. Bill's answering grin was both boyish and predatory. You got much more than that, Abby Gomez. You got my full attention. As she left the building, Abby's mind raced with possibilities and fears. She was stepping into unknown territory, a world of wealth and power she'd only glimpsed from afar. But more frightening than the job was the man himself, the way he made her feel, the desires he awakened in her untouched body. She had never wanted anyone the way she wanted Bill Brown. The revelation terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Whatever game they were playing, Abby knew the stakes were dangerously high. She was risking more than her heart. She was risking her very self, the independent woman she'd fought so hard to become. Yet as a taxi took her back to the ruins of her neighborhood, Abby couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. Something profound had begun in that warehouse during the storm, something that transcended their different worlds and experiences. Whether it led to heartbreak or happiness remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back now. Chapter 3. Dangerous Temptation. Abby's first week at Brown Enterprises passed in a blur of new experiences. Her position in the Community Outreach Department came with an office that, while modest by company standards, was larger than her entire former apartment. Her colleagues were polite but distant, clearly curious about how a woman from the slums had secured such a position, but too professional to ask outright. She threw herself into her work, developing proposals for flood relief programs that would help her former neighborhood. The familiarity of the task grounded her in this unfamiliar world of corporate luxury. But despite her focus, one distraction remained constant: the man whose name adorned the building. Bill had kept his distance since their kiss in his office, their interactions limited to brief, professional exchanges during department meetings. Yet Abby felt his eyes on her whenever they were in the same room, his gaze a tangible caress that left her skin burning and her breath shallow. The restraint he showed only intensified her desire, making her imagine what would happen when that control finally broke. Tonight, she was working late, determined to finish a proposal due the next morning. The office was nearly empty, most employees having left hours ago. The solitude suited her, no curious stares, no whispers following her through the hallways. When her computer screen suddenly went black, Abby thought it was a technical glitch until she realized the overhead lights had also died. The backup generators kicked in seconds later, providing dim emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows across her office. "Perfect," she muttered, saving her work before powering down her computer. It was nearly midnight anyway. Perhaps this was a sign to call it a day. As she gathered her belongings, her office phone rang, startling her in the silence. "Abby Gomez," she answered cautiously. "It's Bill." His deep voice sent an immediate wave of heat through her body. "Are you still in the building?" "Yes, just finishing up. The storm knocked out power to several blocks. The elevators are down." He paused. "Do you know where the emergency stairs are? I can find them. I'm on my way to you. Stay put." Before she could protest, the line went dead. Abby's heart raced at the thought of seeing him alone, away from the professional barriers they'd maintained all week. Part of her wanted to leave before he arrived, to avoid the temptation he represented. But a stronger part, a part she barely recognized, wanted nothing more than to be found by him in the darkened building. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, the confident stride unmistakable even in the dim hallway. When he appeared, in her doorway, Abby's breath caught. He'd shed his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The emergency lights cast shadows across his chiseled features, making him look dangerous and unbearably sexy. "You should have gone home hours ago," Bill said, leaning against the doorframe. His casual pose couldn't hide the tension in his body, the restraint that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "I wanted to finish the flood relief proposal." Abby stood, suddenly aware of how alone they truly were. "The stairs?" Bill nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. The narrow hallway forced her to brush against him, the brief contact sending electricity through her veins. He placed his hand at the small of her back as they walked, the gesture both protective and possessive. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his voice low and intimate in the darkened corridor. "Well enough. The work is fulfilling." "And the rumors? I'm sure they're circulating." Abby tensed. "Nothing I can't handle." His hand on her back pressed slightly firmer. "Tell me," she sighed. "The usual assumptions. That I'm sleeping with the boss. That I didn't earn my position." Bill stopped walking, turning Abby to face him. In the dim light, his eyes were dark with barely controlled emotion. "Does it bother you? What they think?" "Does it bother you?" she countered. His hand moved from her back to her face, fingers tracing her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "The only thing that bothers me is staying away from you. It's been torture, Abby, seeing you every day, wanting you, remembering how you felt in my arms." The raw honesty in his voice undid her. Abby leaned into his touch, all pretense of professionalism forgotten. "Then why did you?" "Because I needed you to know it wasn't about the job, that what's between us is separate from work." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, making her shiver. "I needed you to be sure." They reached the elevator bank, finding it dark and silent. Bill pressed the button anyway, a futile gesture that made Abby smile despite the tension between them. "Force of habit," he said with a rueful grin. A distant crack of thunder reminded them of the storm outside, of the night they'd met. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. "Another storm," Abby murmured, looking up at him through her lashes. Bill's expression darkened with desire. "I've been in one since I met you." The emergency lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging them into total darkness. Abby gasped, instinctively reaching out. Her hands found Bill's chest, his heart pounding beneath her palms. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. "I've got you," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. In the darkness, every sensation was magnified, the solid strength of his body, the heat radiating between them, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something more primal, more male. Abby's hands slid up to his shoulders, feeling the coiled tension in his muscles. "Bill," she breathed, her voice scarcely more than a whisper. He responded by capturing her mouth with his, the kiss instantly deep and consuming. Gone was the controlled passion of their first kiss in his office. This was raw, primal need, a week of restraint shattered in an instant of darkness. Abby moaned against his lips, her body arching into his. Bill's hands slid down to grip her hips, lifting her slightly, as he backed her against the wall beside the elevator. The solid surface behind her provided leverage as she wrapped her arms around his neck, threading her fingers through his hair. His mouth left hers to trail fire down her throat, teeth scraping gently against her pulse point. Abby gasped, her head falling back to give him better access. One of Bill's hands moved to cup her breast through her blouse, his thumb circling her hardened nipple with devastating precision. "You're so responsive," he growled against her skin. "So perfect." The praise emboldened her. Abby's hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, fumbling in the darkness to undo them. When her fingers finally made contact with the hot skin of his chest, they both shuddered. Bill was all hard muscle and smooth skin, his body honed by regular workouts that were evident in each defined plane she explored. "I've dreamed of your hands on me," he confessed, his voice rough with desire. "Every night since the warehouse." The elevator doors suddenly slid open, the car's emergency lighting spilling out to illuminate them in their passionate embrace. For a moment, they froze, blinking in the unexpected light. Bill looked down at Abby, her lips swollen from his kisses, her blouse partially unbuttoned, her eyes wide with desire and surprise. The sight seemed to inflame him further. Without warning, he pulled her into the elevator, his movements urgent and decisive. As soon as the doors closed behind them, he had her against the mirrored wall, his mouth reclaiming hers with renewed hunger. Abby wrapped a leg around his hip, drawing him closer to the ache building between her thighs. The hardness of his arousal pressed against her core, making her gasp into his mouth. Bill's hand slid under her skirt, fingers tracing the edge of her panties with tantalizing restraint. "Tell me you want this," he demanded, his voice hoarse with need. "Tell me you want me." "I want you," Abby admitted, the confession both surrender and victory. "I have since that first night." His fingers slipped beneath the silk barrier, finding her wet and ready for him. Abby cried out at the intimate touch, her hips bucking involuntarily. Bill watched her face as he stroked her, his eyes intense with male satisfaction, as he discovered what made her gasp and moan. "So responsive," he murmured, his voice almost reverent, "so beautifully honest in your desire." Abby had never experienced anything like the sensations rolling through her body. Previous boyfriends had been fumbling and selfish, more concerned with their own pleasure than hers. But Bill touched her with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how to please a woman, his skilled fingers bringing her closer and closer to the edge. Just as the first tremors of release began to build within, the elevator jerked and the main lights came on with blinding brightness. The sudden illumination and movement startled them both. Bill withdrew his hand, steadying Abby as the elevator began to descend. Reality crashed back with brutal force. What was she doing? Letting her boss touch her in an elevator? What kind of woman did that make her? Shame and confusion washed over her, cooling the heat of passion. She stepped away from Bill, straightening her clothing with trembling hands. "Abby," Bill said softly, reaching for her. She shook her head, avoiding his eyes. This was a mistake. The elevator reached the lobby, the doors sliding open to reveal the empty reception area. Abby rushed out, needing escape, needing space to think. "Abby, wait!" Bill called after her, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. She paused, not turning. Around. I can't do this. I can't be what they think I am. The slum girl sleeping her way to the top. Bill closed the distance between them, gently turning her to face him. To her surprise, there was no anger in his expression, only understanding, and something deeper, something that made her heart clench painfully in her chest. "Is that what you think I want? Just sex? A convenient body?" His hands cradled her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Because if that's all I wanted, Abby, there are 1,000 women in this city who would be much less complicated choices than you." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Then what do you want from me?" Bill wiped the tear away with his thumb, his touch unbearably tender. "Everything," he said simply. "I want all of you. Your mind, your passion, your strength. The way you challenge me, the way you see through the wealth and power to the man beneath." His words struck something deep within her, something that recognized their truth. This connection between them transcended physical desire, transcended their different worlds. "I'm scared," she admitted, vulnerability bleeding into her voice. "I've never felt like this before." Bill's expression softened. "Neither have I, and that terrifies me more than you know." The confession from this powerful man, this titan of industry who controlled a business empire with iron determination, touched Abby profoundly. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the glass facade of the building, but inside, something shifted between them, a recognition of mutual vulnerability, of shared fear and desire. "We should take this slowly," Abby said, though her body still thrummed with unfulfilled need. Bill nodded, though the hunger in his eyes remained undiminished. "I'll have my driver take you home." "I don't actually have a home right now," she reminded him with a small smile. "The flood, remember?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Where have you been staying?" "A shelter set up at the community center." "It's fine, really." Something flashed in Bill's eyes, determination, possessiveness, concern. "No, that won't do." "I don't need your charity," Abby said, pride stiffening her spine. "It's not charity." His voice left no room for argument. "It's me looking after, someone I care about. I have a guest apartment in my building. It's yours until you find something suitable." Abby wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence. But the thought of another night on a cot in the crowded shelter, after the day's emotional roller coaster, was too much to bear. "Just until I find my own place," she conceded, "and I'll pay rent." Bill's smile was both triumphant and tender. "We'll discuss terms later." As his private car carried them through the stormy night, Abby wondered if she was making another mistake. Moving into Bill's building, accepting his help, would only deepen her connection to him, would only make it harder to maintain professional boundaries. But as she glanced at his profile, strong and handsome in the passing streetlights, she knew it was already too late for caution. Whatever was happening between them had begun that first night in the warehouse and had only grown stronger despite their attempts to contain it. The storm outside mirrored the one within her, powerful, unpredictable, and impossible to escape. All she could do now was weather it and hope she emerged stronger on the other side. What she couldn't know, as the car pulled up to Bill's luxury high-rise, was that the most dangerous tempest was yet to come. Chapter 4. Surrender. 2 weeks had passed since Abby moved into the guest apartment in Bill's building. 2 weeks of focused work during the day and restless dreams at night. The apartment was luxurious beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Spacious rooms with plush furnishings, a kitchen stocked with everything she could need, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city that had once seemed so unattainable. But the luxury paled in comparison to the torment of knowing Bill was just floors above her, separated by mere distance and the fragile boundaries they'd established after that night in the elevator. They'd maintained professional decorum at work, their interactions cordial and appropriate, yet Abby felt his gaze like a physical caress. Whenever they were in the same room, the heat of it making her skin flush and her pulse race. Tonight would test those boundaries. Bill had invited her to accompany him to the annual charity gala benefiting inner-city education, a major social event that would put them firmly in the public eye together. Abby had agreed, telling herself it was a professional opportunity to network for her community outreach projects. But the dress hanging on her closet door suggested otherwise. The gown had arrived that morning, a stunning creation of midnight blue silk that shimmered like captured starlight. The note accompanying it was simple: something worthy of your beauty. B. Now, as she slipped the dress over her head, Abby could hardly recognize the woman in the mirror. The gown hugged her curves perfectly, the color making her brown skin glow. The neckline dipped low enough to be alluring without being inappropriate, while the back plunged daringly, exposing the elegant line of her spine. A knock at the door startled her from her reflection. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the apartment and opened it to find Bill standing in the hallway, devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders and tall frame. For a moment, he simply stared, his eyes darkening as they traveled from her face down the length of her body and back up again. "You are magnificent," he finally said, his voice rough with appreciation. Abby's cheeks warmed under his intense gaze. "The dress is beautiful." "Thank you." "It's not the dress." Bill stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, an intoxicating blend of sandalwood and something uniquely him. "It's the woman wearing it." The compliment thrilled her despite her attempts to maintain emotional distance. This was dangerous territory. Being seen publicly with him would only fuel the workplace rumors, would only deepen her vulnerability to a man who could shatter her world with a word. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, gesturing between them. "Being seen together at such a public event?" Bill's expression turned serious. "I've never been more certain of anything. But if you're uncomfortable—" "No," Abby interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "I'm not uncomfortable, just aware of the implications." His hand reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the simple gesture sending electricity through her. "Let them talk. What's between us is no one's concern but our own." The ride to the venue in Bill's limousine was charged with unspoken tension. They made small talk about work and the charity, but beneath the conversation ran a current of desire, so powerful Abby could scarcely breathe through it. When Bill's hand occasionally brushed against hers, seemingly by accident, sparks ignited along her skin. The gala was being held at the city's most exclusive hotel, its grand ballroom transformed into a glittering wonderland of crystal and candlelight. As they entered, Abby felt the weight of curious stares. She lifted her chin, determined to show no weakness. "Ready?" Bill asked softly, offering his arm. She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Ready." The evening unfolded in a blur of introductions and conversation. Bill kept her close, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back as he introduced her to business associates, politicians, and socialites. To Abby's surprise, he presented her not as his employee, but as the architect of Brown Enterprises, innovative new community outreach programs, speaking of her work with genuine respect and admiration. "You're making quite an impression," he murmured during a rare moment alone as they stood on the balcony overlooking the hotel's gardens. "The mayor is particularly interested in your flood relief proposals." Abby smiled, warmed by his praise. And the respect she'd been shown. "I'm just glad people are taking these issues seriously. That neighborhood, my neighborhood, has been ignored for too long." Bill studied her face in the moonlight, his eyes soft with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You're remarkable, you know that. Most people in your position would be focused on climbing the social ladder, on leaving their past behind, but you're still fighting for the community that shaped you." The observation touched her deeply. "I can't forget where I came from. Those people matter to me, and you matter to me," Bill said, his voice dropping to an intimate rumble. "More than I ever expected." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Abby's heart raced as Bill stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. They were partially hidden from the ballroom by gauzy curtains, but still visible enough that his gesture would be noted by watchful eyes. "Bill, people will see," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "Good." His thumb traced her lower lip, sending shivers down her spine. "Let them see that I'm captivated by the most beautiful, most intelligent woman in the room." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a server offering champagne. The moment broken, they rejoined the gala, though the electric awareness between them only intensified as the evening progressed. It was past midnight when they finally left, both slightly light-headed from champagne and mutual desire. In the privacy of the limousine, Bill's reserve cracked slightly, his hand finding hers in the darkness, fingers entwining with an intimacy that felt more profound than any kiss. "Come up to my penthouse," he said as they approached their building. "For a nightcap." The invitation carried unmistakable intent. Abby knew if she accepted, their relationship would irrevocably change. The boundaries they'd carefully maintained would collapse, leaving her vulnerable in ways she'd never allowed before. "Yes," she heard herself say, the single word carrying the weight of surrender. Bill's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the building, a stunning expanse of glass and modern design that took Abby's breath away. But she hardly noticed the luxury surrounding them, her attention fixed entirely on the man, watching her with naked hunger in his eyes. He moved to a bar in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Cognac," he explained, handing one to her. "Too fine to rush." Abby accepted the glass, their fingers brushing in a contact that sent electricity arcing between them. She took a sip, the liquid burning a path down her throat, warming her from within. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Bill said, his voice low and intimate as he guided her to a plush sofa overlooking the city lights. The question caught her off guard. She had expected him to touch her, to kiss her, not to continue the getting-to-know-you conversation from the gala. But his eyes held genuine interest, and Abby found herself wanting to share parts of herself she usually kept hidden. "I write poetry," she admitted. "Nothing good enough to publish, but it helps me process things, especially after my mother died." Bill's expression softened. "How old were you?" 16, cancer. The pain had dulled over the years but never truly disappeared. She was a domestic worker, cleaned houses in the wealthy neighborhoods, worked herself to exhaustion to keep me in school. Abby took another sip of cognac. "She never got to see me graduate college." She would be immensely proud of the woman. "You've become," Bill said with quiet certainty. The simple validation brought unexpected tears to Abby's eyes. "What about you? Tell me something I don't know about the great Bill Brown." A shadow crossed his face. "I was abandoned as a child, left at a fire station when I was about 2. No note, no identification." Abby's heart constricted at the thought of him as a vulnerable child, unwanted and alone. "I'm so sorry. I grew up in the system. Some foster homes better than others." His voice was detached, as if recounting someone else's life. When I was 17, I told my social worker I wouldn't be going to another placement. I got a job, lived in a shelter until I could afford a room, put myself through college on scholarships and working 3 jobs. The revelation shattered Abby's preconceptions about him. She had assumed he came from privilege, that his success was built on inherited advantages. "So when you found me in the storm that night," she began, understanding dawning, "I knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything." He finished for her. "To have your life washed away in an instant." The connection between them deepened. With this shared understanding, Abby set down her glass and moved closer to him on the sofa, her hand coming up to touch his face. "We're not so different after all," she whispered. Bill's eyes darkened at her touch. "No, we're not." The air between them charged with electricity. Bill leaned forward, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly blazed into something more urgent. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her onto his lap so that she straddled him, the silk of her gown sliding sensuously against his tuxedo pants. Abby moaned into his mouth as his hands slid up her back, finding the bare skin exposed by the gown's plunging design. His touch left trails of fire in its wake, igniting a need so primal she could barely breathe through it. "I've wanted you since the moment I saw you," Bill confessed against her throat, his lips tracing a path of heat down to the swell of her breasts above the neckline of her dress. "Soaking wet in that storm, fierce and beautiful, and so damn brave." His words thrilled her as much as his touch. Abby's hands fumbled with his bow tie, undoing it and then moving to the buttons of his shirt. She needed to feel his skin, needed to touch the man who had consumed her thoughts for weeks. When her fingers finally made contact with the hard planes of his chest, they both shuddered. Bill was all sculpted muscle and smooth skin, his body a testament to disciplined physical training. Abby explored him with wonder, learning the contours of his shoulders, the ridges of his abdomen. "You're perfect," she breathed, pressing a kiss to the hollow of his throat. Bill groaned at the contact, his control visibly fraying. "Abby, if we don't stop now—" His voice was rough with restraint. "I want you to be sure. I need you to be sure." The concern in his voice, the care he took, with her consent, despite his obvious desire, touched her deeply. Abby looked into his eyes, finding not just lust, but something deeper, something that spoke of genuine caring. "I'm sure," she whispered, rising from his lap and extending her hand to him. "Show me your bedroom, Bill." The certainty in her voice seemed to break the last of his restraint. Bill stood, sweeping her into his arms in a gesture both romantic and possessive. Abby gasped in surprise, her arms automatically winding around his neck as he carried her through the penthouse to a spacious bedroom dominated by a massive bed. He set her down gently beside it, his hands coming up to cup her face. "You are the most exquisite woman I've ever known," he said, the words a solemn vow in the dim light, "and I want to worship every inch of you." The promise sent heat surging through Abby's veins. Bill turned her slowly, his fingers finding the hidden zipper of her gown and lowering it with tantalizing deliberation. As the dress slipped from her shoulders, his lips followed its path, pressing hot, open-mouthed kisses to each newly exposed inch of skin. Abby trembled under his ministrations, her body responding with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened. No man had ever touched her like this, with such focused attention to her pleasure. When the gown finally pooled at her feet, leaving her in nothing but a delicate lace thong, Bill drew in a sharp breath. His eyes traveled over her naked back, her rounded buttocks, the length of her legs. The naked hunger in his gaze made Abby feel powerful despite her vulnerability. Slowly, she turned to face him, fighting the instinct to cover herself. Bill's expression as he took in her bare breasts, the curve of her waist, the dark triangle between her thighs, was one of reverent awe. "God, you're beautiful," he breathed, his voice rough with desire. Abby reached for him, suddenly impatient with the inequality of their state of undress. Together they removed his clothes, jacket, shirt, pants, underwear, until he stood gloriously naked before her. His body was magnificent, all hard muscle and smooth skin, his arousal evident and impressive. When they came together, skin against skin for the first time, both gasped at the exquisite sensation. Bill guided her to the bed, laying her down with exquisite care before covering her body with his. The weight of him, the heat, the hardness pressed against her softness, overwhelmed Abby's senses. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, as his lips traced a path down her throat to her breast. The words were difficult to say, embarrassment coloring her voice. I haven't." Bill's movement stilled, his eyes finding hers. In the dim light, understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something tender and protective. "You're a virgin?" he asked softly, no judgment in his tone. Abby nodded, vulnerable in her admission. "There was never anyone I trusted enough, anyone who mattered enough." The confession transformed something in Bill's demeanor, the raw hunger in his eyes tempered with tenderness, though the desire remained undiminished. "We can stop," he offered, though the words clearly cost him. "If you're not ready." Abby reached up to touch his face, moved by his consideration. "I don't want to." "Stop. I want it to be you, Bill. I want it to be now." His expression softened with emotion. "Then I'll be gentle," he promised, lowering his head to capture her mouth in a kiss of such exquisite tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. True to his word, Bill's touch turned reverential, his hands and mouth exploring her body with deliberate patience. He discovered what made her gasp and moan, what made her arch against him in pleasure. When his fingers found the wetness between her thighs, Abby cried out, unprepared for the intensity of sensation. "Let go for me," he murmured against her breast, his skilled fingers working magic against her most sensitive spot. "I want to watch you come apart." The combination of his touch and commanding voice pushed Abby over the edge. Release crashed through her in waves of pleasure so intense she cried out his name, her body arching off the bed. Bill watched her face as she shattered, male satisfaction evident in his expression. Before she could recover, he positioned himself between her thighs, the hard length of him pressing against her entrance. He paused there, waiting for her eyes to open, to focus on his. "Are you sure?" he asked one final time, his body trembling with the effort of restraint. In answer, Abby lifted her hips, taking him slightly inside her. The stretching sensation was uncomfortable, but not painful, her body slick and ready from her release. With a groan, Bill pushed forward, breaching the barrier of her innocence with one careful thrust. Abby gasped at the sharp pain, her nails digging into his shoulders. Bill froze, allowing her body to adjust to the intrusion, his face a mask of concerned restraint. "Breathe," he instructed gently, pressing soft kisses to her face. "The pain will pass." True to his promise, the discomfort gradually subsided, replaced by a sensation of fullness and connection that transcended the physical. When Abby experimentally moved her hips, pleasure sparked through her, drawing a moan from them both. "That's it," Bill encouraged, beginning to move within her with shallow, careful thrusts. "You feel incredible, so tight, so perfect." His praise emboldened her. Abby wrapped her legs around his waist, drawing him deeper, matching his rhythm with instinctive grace. The discomfort faded entirely, replaced by waves of pleasure that built with each movement. "Bill," she gasped, clinging to him as the sensations intensified. He increased his pace slightly, still mindful of her inexperience, but unable to maintain complete restraint. "Let go again," he commanded, his voice hoarse with need. "Come for me, Abby." The deep timbre of his voice, combined with the exquisite friction of their bodies, pushed her toward another peak. This time, when release claimed her, Bill followed, her name a reverent chant on his lips as he found his own completion. Afterward, he gathered her close, his strong arms a protective cocoon around her sensitized body. Abby nestled against his chest, feeling fundamentally changed. No longer just Abby Gomez from the slums, but a woman who had been claimed, cherished, transformed by passion. "Are you all right?" Bill asked, concern evident in his voice as he smoothed her hair from her face. Abby nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. She had given him something precious, something irreplaceable. In return, he had shown her a pleasure she hadn't known existed, had treated her with a tenderness that spoke of feelings beyond mere desire. "I've never felt so close to anyone," she admitted softly, vulnerability bleeding into her voice. "Is it always like this?" Bill's arms tightened around her. "No," he said with quiet certainty. "What's between us is rare, Abby. Special." The conviction in his voice soothed something in her soul. This wasn't just sex to him, wasn't just the conquest of a virgin from the slums. What they had shared transcended class and background, spoke to a connection neither had expected to. Vined outside, the city glittered like fallen stars, oblivious to the transformation occurring in the penthouse above. Rain began to fall again, pattering against the windows, a gentler echo of the storm that had first brought them together. "Stay with me tonight," Bill murmured against her hair, the request holding none of his usual commanding tone. This was a question, almost a plea. Abby lifted her head to look into his eyes, finding vulnerability there that matched her own. "I'll stay," she promised, sealing the words with a kiss that held the promise of more to come. As sleep claimed them, tangled, in each other's arms. Neither could know that the night's surrender was just the beginning, that the greatest storms, both within and without, still lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Awakening. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bill's penthouse, bathing the room in golden warmth. Abby stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until memories of the previous night flooded back, the charity gala, the intimate revelations, and then her body flushed with heat as she recalled how Bill had claimed her. Innocence, with exquisite care and passion. She turned to find him watching her, his blue eyes intense with an emotion that made her breath catch. How long had he been awake, just looking at her? The thought sent a thrill through her body. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep and something more primal. "How do you feel?" The question held genuine concern. Abby took a moment to assess her body. A pleasant soreness between her thighs, a few tender spots where his passion had marked her skin. "Changed," she answered honestly. "Like I'm not quite the same person I was yesterday." Bill reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her shoulder with reverent gentleness. "Do you regret it?" "No," Abby said without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty. "I've never felt so connected to anyone." Relief softened his features. "Neither have I." The admission seemed to cost him something. A man accustomed to keeping his emotions closely guarded, he leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that started gentle but quickly ignited into something more heated. Abby responded eagerly, her body already learning to crave his touch. When his hand slipped beneath the sheet to caress her breast, she gasped into his mouth. Still sensitive, he murmured against her lips, his thumb brushing over her hardened nipple with deliberate pressure. "Yes," she breathed, arching into his touch. Bill's mouth replaced his hand, drawing her nipple between his lips with gentle suction that sent shockwaves of pleasure through her body. Abby threaded her fingers through his hair, holding him to her breast as he lavished attention on first one and then the other. "I want to taste all of you," he said, his voice a rough caress as he began to move lower, trailing kisses down her stomach, Abby tensed slightly as she realized his intent. "Bill, I've never—" He paused, looking up at her with eyes dark with desire. "Trust me," he urged softly. "I want to show you pleasure in every way possible." The vulnerability in her expression must have touched something in him, because he moved back up to kiss her lips with exquisite tenderness. "We'll only ever do what you're comfortable with," he promised, "but will you let me show you how good this can feel?" His consideration, his patience, despite the obvious hunger in his eyes, melted Abby's hesitation. She nodded, a flush spreading across her cheeks. Bill's smile was both tender and predatory as he moved down her body again, settling between her thighs. The first touch of his mouth against her most intimate place drew a startled cry from Abby's lips. Nothing had prepared her for the intense pleasure of his skilled tongue, exploring her folds, finding and focusing on the sensitive bundle of nerves at her center. "Bill!" she gasped, her hands fisting in the sheets as sensation overwhelmed her. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers over the landscape of her body. "Watch me," he commanded softly. "I want you to see what drives me wild." The sight of him between her thighs, his powerful shoulders keeping her legs parted, his eyes locked on hers as he pleasured her with his mouth, was the most erotic thing Abby had ever experienced. When he slid one finger inside her still tender opening, the dual sensation pushed her rapidly toward climax. "That's it," he encouraged, his voice vibrating against her sensitive flesh. "Let go for me, beautiful." Release crashed over her with shocking intensity, her body bowing off the bed, as waves of pleasure radiated outward from where his mouth worked against her. Bill didn't relent, drawing out her orgasm until she was trembling and incoherent, pleading with him to stop and never stop at the same time. Only when the last aftershocks had subsided did he move back up her body, his expression a mixture of male satisfaction and genuine tenderness. "You're so responsive," he said, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. "So beautifully uninhibited in your pleasure." Abby was still trying to catch her breath, her body humming with residual pleasure. "I didn't know it could be like that," she admitted, wonder coloring her voice. Bill's smile was both proud and hungry. "That's just the beginning of what we can experience together." His arousal pressed hard against her thigh, evidence of his own need. Emboldened by the intimacy they'd shared, Abby reached between them to touch him, her inexperienced hand wrapping around his length with tentative curiosity. Bill's sharp intake of breath encouraged her. "Show me how to please you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his with determination. Something primal flashed in his gaze. "Your touch alone pleases me beyond words," he said, his voice strained as her hand moved experimentally along his shaft. "But I can show you what drives me crazy." He guided her hand, showing her the pressure and rhythm he preferred. Abby was a quick study, thrilled by the power she held to reduce this powerful man to groans of pleasure. "Enough," Bill finally gasped, stilling her movements. "I want to be inside you again." He rolled onto his back, guiding Abby to straddle his hips. "This position gives you control," he explained, his hands steadying her waist. "You can set the pace, take me as deep as feels good for you." The consideration behind his choice touched her deeply. Biting her lip in concentration, Abby positioned herself over him, slowly sinking down onto his length. The angle was different from the previous night, allowing him to penetrate even deeper. She gasped as he filled her completely, the slight discomfort quickly giving way to pleasure. "That's it," Bill encouraged, his hands guiding her hips in a gentle rhythm. "You're perfect, so beautiful like this." Abby gained confidence with each movement, learning what brought them both the most pleasure. When she leaned forward slightly, changing the angle, stars exploded behind her eyelids. "Yes," Bill groaned, recognizing her reaction. "Right there. Chase that feeling." His words, combined with the exquisite friction where their bodies joined, pushed Abby toward another peak. This time she wasn't surprised by the intensity of her release, surrendering to it with newfound confidence. As she tightened around him, Bill's control snapped. With a powerful surge of his hips, he joined her in climax, her name a prayer on his lips. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin slick, with perspiration, hearts gradually slowing from their frantic pace. Abby's head rested on Bill's chest, his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, a comforting rhythm. "Stay here today," he murmured, stroking her hair. "I'll call the office. Tell them we're both working from home." The suggestion was tempting. A day, spent exploring each other's bodies, learning each other's minds, but practical concerns intruded on the fantasy. "I have a meeting with the mayor's office about the flood relief program," Abby reminded him reluctantly. "It's too important to reschedule." Bill sighed, his fingers continuing their gentle path through her hair. "Always so responsible," he said, but his tone held admiration rather than disappointment. "It's one of the things I admire most about you." His praise warmed her more than she expected. They showered together, the intimate act of washing each other's bodies, leading to another passionate encounter against the marble wall. By the time they finally emerged, dressed and ready for the day, Abby's body hummed with a pleasant satisfaction she'd never known before. "I'll have the car take you to your meeting," Bill said, as they rode the elevator down. In the confined space, he couldn't seem to stop touching her. A hand at the small of her back, fingers entwined with hers, lips brushing her temple. "And tonight?" Abby asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Bill's eyes darkened with promise. "Tonight I'll show you more ways I can pleasure you," he said, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down her spine. "If you're not too sore." The memory of that promise stayed with Abby throughout her day, making it difficult to concentrate on budget proposals and zoning regulations. By the time she returned to the building that evening, anticipation had built to an almost unbearable level. She found Bill waiting in her apartment rather than his penthouse, a domestic scene that touched her deeply. He'd prepared dinner, or rather had it catered, and opened an expensive bottle of wine. "I thought you might be more comfortable here tonight," he explained, his consideration for her feelings evident in the gesture. They ate together, discussing their respective days, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Yet beneath the normalcy ran an undercurrent of desire, building with each shared glance, each accidental touch. When Bill finally set aside his wineglass and extended his hand to her, Abby took it without hesitation, allowing him to lead her to the bedroom, her bedroom in the apartment he'd provided. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and intimate as he began to undress her with deliberate slowness, "I want to teach you how to prolong pleasure, how to build it until it's almost unbearable before finding release." The promise sent a shiver of anticipation through Abby's body. "Teach me," she whispered, surrendering to his experienced hands. True to his word, Bill introduced her to the art of delayed gratification, bringing her to the edge of climax again and again, only to back away, building her pleasure to heights she hadn't known possible. By the time he finally allowed her release, Abby was practically sobbing with need, her body arching off the bed as wave after wave of intense pleasure crashed through her. "That's it," he murmured against her throat, his own control visibly fraying, as he watched her come apart beneath him. "You're so beautiful when you surrender to pleasure." The night became a journey of discovery as Bill guided Abby through an awakening that transcended mere physical sensation. He taught her the language of desire, how to communicate her needs, how to read his responses. With each new experience, each shared climax, the connection between them deepened, becoming something neither had anticipated when they'd first met during that violent storm. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay tangled in sheets damp with their passion, Abby traced the hard planes of Bill's chest with wondering fingers. "How many women have you been with?" she asked, the question emerging before she could censor it. Bill's hand stilled where it had been stroking her back. "Does it matter?" "I'm just curious," Abby said, though a part of her wanted reassurance that what they shared was as special to him as it was to her. He was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "There have been others," he finally admitted, "but none that mattered. None that made me feel the way you do." The simple honesty in his voice soothed something in Abby's soul. She wasn't naive enough to believe a man like Bill, wealthy, powerful, devastatingly attractive, had lived a monastic life before meeting her. But the conviction that what they shared was unique to him, as well as to her, was profoundly reassuring. "What are we doing, Bill?" she asked softly, vulnerability bleeding into her voice. "What is this between us?" His arms tightened around her, drawing her closer against his solid warmth. "I don't have a name for it yet," he confessed. "I just know I want more. More nights like this. More mornings waking up with you in my arms. More of the way you challenge me, surprise me, make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible." The words weren't a declaration of love. It was too soon for that, but they held a promise that transcended mere physical desire. Whatever was growing between them had roots deeper than passion, branches reaching towards something that might, with time and nurturing, blossom into something profound and lasting. "I want that too," Abby admitted, the confession both frightening and liberating. Bill's kiss was tender, a sealing of their unspoken pact. As his hands began to move over her body once more, rekindling the fire that seemed to burn perpetually, between them, Abby surrendered to the awakening that had begun that stormy night, an awakening not just of her body, but of her heart. Outside, the city continued its restless dance of light and shadow, oblivious to the transformation occurring in the apartment high above its streets. In that private sanctuary, Abby Gomez, once a virgin girl from the slums, was becoming a woman who understood the power of her own desire, the strength of her own heart, and the unprecedented vulnerability of allowing herself to fall for a man who had claimed her in ways that transcended the merely physical. What neither of them could know was that their newfound happiness teetered on the edge of a precipice, that forces were already in motion that would test the fragile bond forming between them, challenging not just their passion, but the very foundation of trust upon which it was built. Chapter 6. Secret Escape. "Pack for warm weather," was all Bill had told Abby the night before, his eyes gleaming with secretive excitement as he'd kissed her goodbye. 3 days. Nothing formal required. Now, standing on the private airstrip, watching a sleek jet with the Brown Enterprises logo taxi toward them, Abby felt a flutter of apprehension, mingled with exhilaration. The past month since their first night together had been a whirlwind of passion and discovery. Each day brought new dimensions to their relationship, shared meals, late-night conversations, and nights of increasingly uninhibited intimacy. "Ready? In for an adventure?" Bill asked, appearing beside her with that magnetic confidence that still made her heart race. He looked different today, more relaxed in linen pants and an unbuttoned collared shirt, his usual corporate armor shed for something more carefree. "Where are we going?" Abby asked, the question she'd been forbidden from asking until now. Bill's smile was both boyish and seductive. "My private island in the Caribbean, completely secluded. Just us, the staff who maintain the property, and miles of pristine beach." The extravagance of it, a private island, momentarily took Abby's breath away. Despite weeks of exposure to Bill's wealth, there were still moments when the vast gulf between their backgrounds struck her anew. "You own an island," she stated flatly. Bill's expression turned cautious. "Is that a problem?" Abby laughed, shaking her head. "Just another reminder that I'm dating a man who could buy the entire neighborhood I grew up in without blinking." "Dating?" Bill raised an eyebrow, his hand finding the small of her back as they walked toward the waiting jet. "Is that what we're doing?" The question carried weight beyond its casual delivery. They'd been sleeping together for weeks, spending nearly every night in either his penthouse or her apartment. Yet neither had put a label on what was happening. Between them, what would you call it? Abby challenged, pausing at the foot of the boarding stairs. Bill's eyes softened, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I'd call it the most important relationship of my life." The simple honesty in his voice brushed away Abby's insecurities. She raised on tiptoes to kiss him, the once tentative gesture now familiar and confident. "Then yes, I'm ready for an adventure." The flight passed in comfortable luxury, Abby marveling at the private jet's amenities while Bill worked on his laptop, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand or brush a kiss against her temple. By the time they landed on a small airstrip on what Bill informed her was a larger neighboring island, the sun was setting in a spectacular blaze of orange and gold. "We'll take the boat from here," Bill explained as they descended the jet's stairs, to where a sleek speedboat awaited them at a private dock. The island's too small for a proper runway. The boat ride through darkening waters, salt spray in her face, and Bill's arms secure around her waist felt like crossing a threshold between worlds. When they finally rounded a rocky promontory to reveal a crescent of white sand beach fronting, a sprawling villa lit with warm golden lights, Abby gasped. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Bill said, his voice carrying over the engine's purr. "My private paradise." The name suited the place perfectly. As they docked and were greeted by a small, discreet staff who quickly whisked away their luggage, Abby felt a sense of having stepped into a dream. The villa was open and airy, its architecture blending seamlessly with the tropical surroundings. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed panoramic ocean views, while the gentle sound of waves provided a constant, soothing soundtrack. "This place is incredible," she breathed, as Bill led her through the main living area to a vast master suite that opened directly onto the beach. "I bought it 5 years ago," he explained, dismissing the staff with a polite nod. "It was after a particularly brutal corporate takeover. I needed somewhere to escape, somewhere no one could reach me." Abby ran her fingers along a carved wooden table, absorbing the luxury and isolation of the place. "And now you've brought me here." Bill's expression turned serious as he crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I've never brought anyone here before," he said quietly. "This place has always been just for me, until now." The significance of the admission wasn't lost on Abby. This powerful man, who guarded his privacy and vulnerability so carefully, was sharing something deeply personal with her. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said, reaching up to touch his face. Bill turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. "You've changed something in me, Abby Gomez. Broken through walls I didn't even know I'd built." Before she could respond, he swept her into his arms, carrying her to the enormous bed that dominated the far end of the suite. Moonlight streamed through the open doors, bathing them in silver as Bill laid her down with reverent care. "Let me show you how much you mean to me," he whispered, his hands already working at the buttons of her blouse. That night, their lovemaking took on a new dimension. Slower, deeper, more intense than the passionate encounters they'd shared back in the city. Here, isolated from the world, with only the sound of waves and their mingled breaths, something shifted between them. Bill's usual controlled dominance gave way to a vulnerability that matched Abby's own, creating a perfect balance of giving and taking. Dawn found them tangled together on the beach, a blanket hastily spread beneath them after they'd abandoned the bedroom for the irresistible call of the moonlit ocean. Abby woke first, marveling at the sight of Bill Brown, powerful CEO, ruthless businessman, sleeping peacefully beside her, his face boyish and unguarded in repose. The next 3 days passed in a dreamlike haze of sensual pleasure and deepening intimacy. They swam naked in the crystalline waters, made love on every surface of the villa, shared quiet meals prepared by the chef who appeared only to deliver food before discreetly vanishing. Bill taught Abby to snorkel among the vibrant coral reefs that fringed the island, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony beneath the waves as they discovered an underwater world as magical as the one they were creating together. In the evenings, they talked for hours about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Bill revealed more about his childhood in foster care, the abandonment issues that had shaped his drive for success and control. Abby shared the struggles of growing up in the slums, of watching her mother work herself to death, of fighting for every opportunity against a system designed to keep her down. On their last night, they sat on the beach watching the sunset. Abby nestled between Bill's legs, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I don't want to go back," she confessed, tilting her head back to look up at him. Bill's laugh rumbled through his chest against her back. "We could stay," he suggested, only half joking. "I can run the company remotely. You could continue your community work from here." The fantasy was tempting, this perfect bubble of happiness, isolated from the real world and its complications. But Abby knew better than most the cost of escapism. "The real world is waiting for us," she said softly. "My neighborhood still needs rebuilding. Your company still needs leading." Bill sighed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," she teased. "You were just too blinded by lust to notice." His arms tightened around her. "Not just lust," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I'm falling in love with you, Abby Gomez." The words, spoken for the first time, hung in the air between them. Powerful, transformative, terrifying in their vulnerability. Abby turned in his arms to face him, seeing the same mixture of fear and hope she felt reflected in his eyes. "I'm falling in love with you, too," she admitted, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. Their kiss tasted of salt and promise, sealing words that changed everything. That night, their lovemaking took on an almost desperate edge, as if both were trying to imprint the memory of the other on their skin, their souls. In the morning, as they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the island, Abby noticed Bill taking a call in the villa's study, his expression darkening as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he rejoined her, a tension had returned to his shoulders that hadn't been present during their idyllic escape. "Everything okay?" she asked as they boarded the speedboat that would take them back to the waiting jet. "Just business," he answered, with a dismissive wave. But Abby didn't miss the worried glance he cast back at the island, as if already mourning the loss of their private paradise. What neither of them knew was that their sanctuary had been breached in ways they couldn't imagine. As their jet soared back toward the city, photographs were already circulating, grainy but unmistakable images of them embracing on the beach, swimming naked in the crystal waters, boarding the private jet, hand in hand. The headline that would greet them upon their return was already being typeset. "Billionaire's Slum Girl, the Rags to Riches, Story of Bill Brown's Latest Conquest." Their perfect escape was about to collide violently with reality, testing the fragile love they'd just confessed in ways neither was prepared for. Chapter 7. Betrayal's Sting. The headline hit like a physical blow. Abby stared at her phone screen, in disbelief, the words burning into her retinas. "Billionaire's Slum Girl, the rags to riches story of Bill Brown's latest conquest." Beneath the sensationalist headline were photos, unmistakably her and Bill on the island, their private moments exposed for public consumption. Their driver had just dropped her at her apartment, while Bill continued to his office for an emergency board meeting. They'd landed barely an hour ago, the blissful afterglow of their island escape still warming her skin. now that warmth turned to cold dread as she scrolled through the article, each word more vicious than the last. Sources. Close to Brown reveal a pattern of short-lived affairs with women from disadvantaged backgrounds. The questions about her rapid promotion within Brown Enterprises. Previous women report being discarded after Brown tired of his charity cases. But worst of all were the quotes supposedly from someone within Bill's inner circle. Bill has a savior complex. He enjoys rescuing women from poverty, setting them up in luxury apartments, buying them expensive gifts, and then moving on when a new project catches his eye. Abby Gomez is just the latest in a long line. He'll keep her around until the novelty wears off. Abby's phone buzzed with an incoming call, her cousin from the old neighborhood. Ignoring it, she continued reading the article, absorbing every cruel insinuation. According to the piece, she was nothing but a gold digger who'd leveraged her body to escape the slums, while Bill was a wealthy playboy with a penchant for slumming it with impoverished women before eventually growing bored. Her phone buzzed. Relentlessly, messages from former neighbors, acquaintances from college co-workers. One text from a colleague in her department was particularly cutting. Always wondered how you got that job. Guess now we know. Tears stung Abby's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was precisely what she'd feared when first becoming involved with Bill. The scrutiny, the judgment, the reduction of her accomplishments to nothing more than sexual currency. When her phone rang again, and Bill's name flashed on the screen, she almost didn't answer. But a deeper need to hear his voice, to have him refute the horrible claims, won out. "Have you seen it?" she asked without preamble. "I'm handling it." Bill's voice was tight with controlled fury. "My legal team is already preparing action against the publication. We'll find out who took those photos and who provided those quotes." His business-like response, focused on damage control rather than her emotional state, sent a chill through Abby's heart. "Is it true?" she asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. "Is what true?" Bill sounded distracted, voices murmuring in the background. "That I'm the latest in a long line. That you have a pattern of rescuing women from poverty only to discard them when you get bored." The silence that followed lasted a beat too long. "Abby, that's absurd. You can't possibly believe—" "Answer the question, Bill." Her voice was steadier than she felt. She heard him sigh. "I've dated women from various backgrounds. Some happened to come from less privileged circumstances. That doesn't make it a pattern or a fetish, as this garbage article implies." The careful phrasing sent warning signals through Abby's mind. "How many?" she pressed. "This isn't a conversation we should have over the phone," Bill deflected. "I'm in the middle of damage control here. The board is concerned about company image. Our stock has already taken a hit. How many women have you rescued before me?" "Bill?" Abby interrupted, anger beginning to replace hurt. "2. He finally admitted, the word clipped. "But those relationships were nothing like what we have. You're different." "What we shared on the island was private," Abby cut in. "Or so I thought. Who knew about the island, Bill? Who could have tipped off photographers about our trip?" Another pause. "Very few people. My assistant, the pilot, the island staff, and—" "Your ex-girlfriend?" Abby asked, remembering a call he'd taken on the island, his expression darkening afterward. Bill's sharp intake of breath was confirmation enough. "Victoria called while we were there," he admitted reluctantly. "She needed some documents signed for a charity we co-chair. I mentioned we were at the island. She's not behind this, Abby. She wouldn't—" "The Victoria Winters?" Abby interrupted, the pieces falling into place. "The billionaire heiress you dated last year. The woman whose beauty and sophistication had graced countless society pages, who moved through Bill's world with the ease of birthright. It ended months before I met you," Bill assured her. "And it was amicable." Abby laughed bitterly. "Clearly. Not as amicable as you thought?" This is exactly what they want. Bill's voice took on a pleading edge. To drive a wedge between us. Don't let them win, Abby. What we have is real. I meant what I said on the island. I'm falling in love with you. The words that had made her heart soar just days ago now rang hollow against the backdrop of public humiliation. I need time to think, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'll talk to you tomorrow. She ended the call before he could respond, sinking onto her sofa as the full weight of the situation crashed over her. Her carefully constructed professional reputation, her hard-won dignity, both potentially shattered by a salacious story that reduced her to nothing more than a billionaire's exotic plaything. The day passed in a haze of ignored calls and messages. Abby alternated between rage, humiliation, and crushing doubt. Was she truly special to Bill, or just another in a line of impoverished women he'd elevated temporarily before moving on? Had she unknowingly played into some savior complex, some pattern she'd been too blinded by passion to recognize? Evening found her staring out at the city lights, remembering how she'd once viewed this skyline from her flood-ravaged neighborhood, seeing it as a distant world she'd never be part of. Now she was here. But at what cost? A knock at her door startled her from her dark thoughts. Opening it revealed Victoria Winters herself, stunning in an impeccably tailored suit, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, her expression composed but with a subtle undercurrent of satisfaction. "Miss Gomez," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I think it's time we had a chat." Abby's first instinct was to slam the door in the woman's face, but curiosity won out. She stepped aside, allowing Victoria to enter the apartment with graceful confidence. "Lovely place," Victoria observed, her gaze taking in the surroundings. "Though smaller than the apartment he gave Jennifer, you must not have made as strong an impression." The casual cruelty of the remark stung precisely as intended. "What do you want?" Abby asked, refusing to show weakness. Victoria extracted a memory stick from her designer handbag, holding it between manicured fingers. "To save you from the inevitable heartbreak. Bill has a pattern, darling, one I discovered too late. And I'm supposed to believe you're here out of the goodness of your heart." Abby crossed her arms, skepticism evident in her stance. Victoria laughed softly. "Hardly. Let's say I have a vested interest in seeing Bill's rehabilitation. He's not a bad man, just damaged in ways that make him toxic to women who actually care for him." She placed the memory stick on the coffee table. Emails, bank transfers, apartment leases, all documenting Bill's previous projects. Jennifer from the Bronx 3 years ago. Sophia from the South Side before her, both given jobs, apartments, a taste of his world, before he grew bored and discarded them. Her perfect features arranged themselves into a sympathetic mask. The apartments always stay in his name, by the way, easy to evict when things end. Abby's stomach clenched as she stared at the small device containing what might be confirmation of her worst fears. "Why should I believe anything from you?" "You shouldn't," Victoria agreed smoothly. "You should verify everything yourself. Ask Bill directly about Jennifer and Sophia. Watch his reaction closely." She moved toward the door, mission apparently accomplished. "Oh, and you might want to check your bank account. Bill always opens one for his projects. Initial deposit is usually $50,000. His way of making sure you stay financially dependent while creating the illusion of generosity." With that parting shot she left, the expensive scent of her perfume lingering in the air like poison. Abby's hands trembled as she reached for her laptop. A quick search confirmed Victoria's claims about the previous women. Jennifer Santos, once a receptionist at Brown Enterprises, now working for a competitor in another city. Sophia Reyes, formerly from Chicago's impoverished South Side, now running a small non-profit funded primarily by an anonymous donor. Both had followed trajectories disturbingly similar to Abby's own, rescued during personal crises, given jobs and apartments, paraded briefly through Bill's world before disappearing from it. And when she logged into her banking app, there it was, an account she hadn't opened with a balance of exactly $50,000. The first deposit had been made the day after the flood, the day after she'd met Bill. Bile rose in Abby's throat. Had everything, from their chance meeting during the storm to their passionate declarations on the island, been part of some script he'd followed before? Was she just the latest iteration of a pattern rooted in his abandoned child psychology? A woman he saved to heal his own emotional wounds? When her phone rang again with Bill's name on the screen, Abby finally answered, her voice cold with hurt and anger. "We need to talk," she said before he could speak. "About Jennifer Santos and Sophia Reyes, about the bank account you opened for me without my knowledge, about why Victoria Winters just left my apartment with quite an interesting story to tell." Bill's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of curses. "Victoria was there? Abby, whatever she told you, is it true?" Abby cut him off, her voice breaking. "Am I just following a pattern you've established with other women from backgrounds like mine? Was any of it real?" "All of it was real," Bill insisted, emotion edging into his voice. "Victoria is manipulating you, manipulating the situation. Yes, I dated Jennifer and Sophia. Yes, there are superficial similarities in how we met. But what I feel for you is completely different." "And the bank account," Abby pressed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. A pause. "A contingency. In case things didn't work out between us, I wanted to ensure you'd be okay financially. It was meant as protection, not a payment." The explanation, however reasonable on the surface, felt hollow against the mounting evidence of a pattern. "I need to know something," Abby said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And I need you to be completely honest. Did you arrange our meeting during the storm?" "What?" Bill sounded genuinely shocked. "How could I possibly? Your car conveniently breaking down in my neighborhood during a flood, coming to my rescue like some knight in shining armor. Was it orchestrated, Bill? Did you target me specifically?" "That's insane!" Bill's voice hardened with frustration. "You can't possibly believe I somehow engineered a natural disaster to meet you. This is exactly what Victoria wants, to plant these seeds of doubt, to make you question everything we've shared." His denial should have reassured her, but Abby was too deep in a spiral of suspicion to accept it at face value. "I think," she said slowly, "that I need space to figure out what's real and what isn't. I can't do that with you trying to manage the situation, trying to explain away each revelation with plausible denials. Abby, please." The raw emotion in Bill's voice nearly broke her resolve. "Let me come over. Let me explain in person. There are contexts, nuances that Victoria has deliberately excluded." "Not tonight," Abby said firmly. "I need time to think clearly without your influence." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. When Bill finally spoke, his voice had regained its usual controlled quality, though Abby could hear the strain beneath it. "Take whatever time you need, but remember this, what we shared on that island wasn't fabricated. What I feel for you isn't part of some pattern or psychological damage. It's real, Abby, the most real thing I've ever felt." After they disconnected, Abby sat in the gathering darkness, Victoria's memory stick sitting like a malevolent talisman on her coffee table. Part of her wanted to destroy it without looking, to choose blind faith in the man who'd shown her passion and tenderness beyond anything she'd experienced. But the pragmatic part of her, the part forged in the hardships of the slums, knew that willful ignorance was a luxury she couldn't afford. With trembling fingers, she inserted the memory stick into her laptop and began reading through its contents. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, Abby packed a small bag with essentials. The evidence wasn't conclusive, Some documents supported Victoria's claims, while others suggested more complex situations with different contexts than Victoria had implied. But one thing was clear. She couldn't think objectively while living in an apartment Bill provided, working at a job he'd given her, surrounded by the trappings of a life that might be built on shifting sand. She needed to return to solid ground, to the community that had shaped her, to find clarity away from Bill's magnetic presence and Victoria's poisonous insinuations. As she stepped out of the luxury building for what might be the last time, Abby felt both heartbroken and strangely liberated. She had given Bill her innocence, her trust, her emerging love. Now she needed to reclaim her independence, her judgment, her self-respect. A taxi took her back to her old neighborhood, still rebuilding from the flood's devastation. The contrast between the gleaming tower she'd left and the struggling community she returned to couldn't have been starker. Yet as neighbors recognized her, offering warmth and solidarity despite the gossip now swirling about her, Abby felt a certainty she'd been missing. Whatever happened with Bill, whatever truths she ultimately uncovered, she wouldn't lose herself in the process. The girl from the slums had become a woman capable of standing on her own, and no billionaire, no matter how captivating, could take that transformation away from her. Chapter 8. Hollow Victory. 2 weeks had passed since Abby left Bill's world. Behind, 2 weeks of rebuilding, not just the flood-damaged homes around her, but her own fractured sense of self. She'd taken residence in her cousin's spare room, a far cry from the luxury apartment she'd abandoned, but it felt honest in a way that glossy sanctuary never had. The community had rallied around her despite the gossip. Many remembered Abby from before, the determined girl who'd fought her way to a college degree despite poverty's constraints, who'd returned even after success to help those left behind. They cared little for tabloid speculation about her relationship with a billionaire. Abby threw herself into volunteer work, coordinating the ongoing flood recovery efforts. Without a formal job, she had time to focus on what really mattered, helping families return to habitable homes, ensuring relief funds reached those most in need, advocating with local officials for better infrastructure in historically neglected neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Brown Enterprises continued operating without her, the community outreach programs she'd designed now managed by someone else. Abby had resigned via email 3 days after returning to the neighborhood, a coldly professional message that belied the emotional turmoil behind it. Bill had respected her wish for space, making no attempt to contact her beyond a single formal acknowledgement of her resignation that felt more like his assistant's work than his own. The silence from him hurt more than she cared to admit. "You're doing it again," her cousin Tasha observed one evening as they sat on the apartment's tiny balcony, watching sunset paint the distant skyscrapers gold. Staring at his tower, Abby blinked, realizing she had indeed been fixated on the gleaming spire of Brown Enterprises headquarters visible on the horizon. "Force of habit," she muttered, shifting her gaze. "Girl, you need to either go talk to the man or stop mooning over him," Tasha said with characteristic bluntness. "This in-between thing is eating you alive." "I'm not mooning," Abby protested, weakly, though the ache in her chest suggested otherwise. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Tasha handed her a newspaper, folded to reveal a business section article. "Saw this today." The headline made Abby's throat tighten. Brown Enterprises CEO announces $50 million investment in flood zone revitalization. The accompanying photo showed Bill at a press conference, his expression serious and professional. But Abby, who had learned to read the subtle nuances of his face during their intimate weeks together, could see the shadows under his eyes, the strain in his jaw. "He's doing exactly what we planned," she said softly, skimming the article. The initiative was virtually identical to proposals she'd developed during her brief tenure at Brown Enterprises. Low-income housing built to withstand future flooding, local hiring requirements, community ownership structures that prevented gentrification. Seems to me like he's sending a message, Tasha observed, one that's got nothing to do with business and everything to do with you. Abby folded the newspaper, her heart conflicted. Was this Bill's way of reaching out, of showing he valued her ideas even in her absence? Or was it simply good business, a PR move to counter the scandal still simmering in the gossip columns? It doesn't change anything, she said finally. The questions I had are still unanswered. But later that night, alone in the small bedroom that felt increasingly confining, Abby allowed herself to remember their time on the island, the vulnerability in Bill's eyes as he'd confessed his feelings, the gentle way he'd held her as though she were something precious. Had it all been performance, a pattern repeated with other women? Or had there been truth in those moments that transcended whatever damage had shaped him? Across the city, in his penthouse office, Bill Brown stared at financial projections without seeing them. The numbers blurred before his eyes, replaced by memories of Abby, her smile in the morning light, her passion when they made love, her fierce intelligence when discussing community development. "Sir?" His assistant's voice broke through his reverie. "The board is waiting in the conference room." Bill nodded, straightening his tie as he rose. Another day of pretending to care about profit margins and market share when all that truly mattered had walked out of his life 2 weeks ago. He'd respected her request for space, though every instinct had screamed to follow her, to make her listen, to prove Victoria's manipulations for what they were. The $50 million investment in flood zone revitalization had been his compromise, a way to honor Abby's vision while giving her the distance she needed. He'd hoped she might reach out after the announcement, but her continued silence spoke volumes. "The numbers for the first quarter are strong," his CFO was saying when Bill entered the conference room. "Despite the temporary dip following the personal publicity situation, we've fully recovered." Bill nodded mechanically, taking his seat at the head of the table. The personal publicity situation. Such a sanitized way to describe the devastation of having his private life exposed, his relationship with Abby reduced to tawdry speculation. "And the community investment?" he asked, interrupting a presentation on Asian market expansion. "How are we progressing with implementation?" The board members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by his continued fixation on what many viewed as a charitable sidebar to the company's real business. Only his COO, David, who'd known Bill the longest, seemed to understand. "We've secured the necessary permits," David reported. "Local hiring has begun for the initial phase. The community response has been overwhelmingly positive." "And Abby Gomez?" The question slipped out before Bill could stop it, betraying the professional veneer he'd struggled to maintain. "Has she had any involvement with the local organizers?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, David spoke, his voice gentle with understanding. "She's been coordinating independent volunteer efforts in the area. Our team has reached out, but she's declined official involvement with Brown Enterprises projects." The news shouldn't have surprised Bill, yet it felt like a physical blow. Abby was so committed to her community that she'd work alongside his company's initiative, but refused direct connection to him or his organization. The depth of her distrust cut deeper than he'd anticipated. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, appearing at the door with uncharacteristic urgency. "There's a situation requiring your immediate attention." Grateful for the excuse to escape the boardroom's suddenly stifling atmosphere, Bill followed her into the hallway. "What is it?" "Victoria Winters has just given an exclusive interview to City magazine," his assistant said, handing him a tablet displaying an advance copy of the article set to publish the following day. "Our PR team thought you should see it immediately." The headline alone made Bill's blood run cold. The Real Bill Brown, an insider's account. Scanning the piece, his fury mounted with each paragraph. Victoria had painted herself as the concerned ex who'd tried to save Abby from his pattern of manipulation. She described in calculated detail how he supposedly targeted vulnerable women from impoverished backgrounds, collecting them as part of some psychological compulsion stemming from his abandoned child status. Most damning were the quotes supposedly from Jennifer and Sophia, his previous girlfriends, describing how they'd been discarded once he tired of his savior role. The fact that both women had signed NDAs as part of their separation agreements, standard for anyone leaving his employment, made direct refutation difficult. "Get legal on this now," Bill ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the rage boiling inside him. "And find Jennifer and Sophia. I want to know if they actually said any of this, or if Victoria fabricated their quotes." As his team scrambled to contain this fresh attack, Bill retreated to his private office, pouring himself a rare midday drink. The irony wasn't lost on him. His empire had never been stronger, the billions in his accounts never higher, yet he'd never felt more hollow. Success meant nothing without Abby. The realization struck him with the force of absolute truth. All, the wealth, the power, the achievements he'd pursued with single-minded determination since clawing his way out of the foster system, none of it filled the emptiness her absence had created. Draining his glass, Bill made a decision. He wouldn't fight Victoria's character assassination through lawyers and press releases. He would fight it through actions, by being the man Abby had believed him to be before doubt poisoned what they'd built. In her cousin's apartment, Abby was just returning from a day coordinating volunteer builders when Tasha thrust a tablet into her hands. "You need to see this, now." The interview with Victoria made Abby's stomach churn. The calculated way the woman portrayed herself as Abby's protector while systematically destroying Bill's reputation was breathtaking in its manipulation. Yet beneath the obvious malice, certain details rang true enough to reignite Abby's doubts. "Do you believe her?" Tasha asked after Abby finished reading. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Abby admitted. "Some of it aligns with what I already knew. Some feels exaggerated or twisted." Her phone rang before Tasha could respond. The number was unfamiliar, but Abby answered, desperate for distraction from the turmoil in her mind. "Is this Abby Gomez?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "Jennifer Santos." The name hit Abby like a physical blow. "Bill's ex. I think we need to talk." Hours later, seated in a quiet corner of a nondescript cafe, Abby studied the woman across from her. Jennifer Santos was beautiful in an understated way, her intelligence evident in her direct gaze. "I never spoke to Victoria or that magazine," Jennifer said without preamble. "Those quotes are fabricated. I signed an NDA when I left Brown Enterprises, but I'm risking it because what she's doing is wrong." Abby's heart raced with conflicting emotions. "Why should I believe you?" Jennifer smiled sadly. "Because unlike Victoria, I have nothing to gain. Here, Bill and I ended 3 years ago. I've moved on, happily married now." She flashed a wedding ring. "But I won't sit by while Victoria destroys him with lies." "So none of it's true?" Abby asked, needing clarity. "The pattern she described?" Jennifer sighed, her expression thoughtful. "Bill has issues. What abandoned child wouldn't? Yes, he met me during a crisis in my life. Yes, he helped me financially, gave me a job, an apartment. But it wasn't some calculated grooming scenario Victoria describes." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We dated for 8 months. It ended because we wanted different things, not because he discarded me once the novelty wore off. He was generous in the breakup, helped me find a new job, let me stay in the apartment until I found my own place." "And Sophia?" Abby pressed, needing the full picture. Similar story from what I understand. Bill is attracted to strength in adversity. He recognizes it because it's what saved him. Jennifer leaned forward earnestly. Look, he's not perfect. He has control issues, trust problems, but he's not the predator Victoria depicts. Why is she doing this? Abby asked, the question that had plagued her for weeks. Jennifer's expression hardened. Because Bill was serious about you in a way he never was with her. Victoria wanted marriage, social standing, the perfect power couple. Bill wanted something real. The words settled over Abby like gentle rain, washing away layers of doubt. How do you know how he felt about me? Because he called me, Jennifer admitted, after you left, asked if I'd talk to you, tell you the truth about our relationship. He's never done that before, Abby, never cared enough about what an ex thought. To make that call, as she left the cafe, Abby felt clarity beginning to replace confusion. Jennifer's account aligned with the man she'd come to know, flawed, complicated, shaped by abandonment, but fundamentally decent. The bank account, the apartment, perhaps they had been genuine attempts at protection rather than creating dependence, filtered through his damaged understanding of relationships. But before she could process this new perspective, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Tasha. Get back here now. Bill Brown just showed up at the volunteer site. He's putting on a hard hat and helping rebuild houses. Across town, Bill Brown, billionaire CEO of a global enterprise, was learning to hang drywall under the skeptical supervision of a veteran contractor. He'd arrived at the volunteer site without fanfare, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, asking how he could help. The initial shock and wariness from the community volunteers had slowly given way to cautious acceptance as Bill worked alongside them, taking direction without ego, his expensive hands quickly blistering from unaccustomed labor. You're doing it wrong, a teenage boy informed him bluntly, demonstrating the proper technique for measuring and cutting insulation. Like this, see? Bill nodded, accepting the correction with a humility that would have shocked his board members. Thanks. I'm still learning. By the time Abby arrived, breathless from rushing across the neighborhood, Bill had shed his button-down to work in a t-shirt, sweat and gypsum dust coating his skin as he helped install a ceiling. He hadn't come with cameras or PR teams, just himself, offering labor rather than merely money. Their eyes met across the half-finished room, and everything around them seemed to fade away. Bill's face, stripped of its usual corporate mask, revealed raw emotion, hope, fear, determination, and something deeper that made Abby's heart constrict painfully in her chest. This wasn't the calculated move of a man with a savior complex. This was vulnerability in its purest form. A powerful man, stepping completely out of his element, risking ridicule and failure to demonstrate through actions rather than words what she truly meant to him. As they stood frozen in silent communication, neither aware of the curious glances from volunteers around them, a realization crystallized in Abby's mind. The victory Victoria thought she'd achieved by separating them was hollow indeed. Because true connection, the kind she and Bill had forged through storm and sanctuary, couldn't be destroyed by doubt alone. The real question was whether they were brave enough to rebuild what had been damaged, just as they were helping rebuild this community, one painful, difficult piece at a time. Chapter 9. Desperate Redemption. The first raindrops hit as Abby and Bill stood frozen in silent recognition across the half-finished room. Within moments, the sporadic patter intensified to a steady downpour, then escalated to a deluge reminiscent of the storm that had first brought them together. "Everyone inside!" shouted the site coordinator as volunteers scrambled to protect building materials and tools. "Weather Service just issued a flash flood warning." The mention of flooding snapped Bill and Abby from their private moment into immediate action. Without discussion, they fell into coordinated movement. Bill helping secure heavy plywood sheets, while Abby organized volunteers to move electrical equipment to higher ground. The drainage system on 3rd Street is already backing up, a volunteer reported, rushing in drenched. Water's rising fast in the lower section. Abby's face paled. There are still 5 families living in temporary shelters down there. The repairs aren't finished. Bill was already pulling out his phone. I'll get emergency transport. No time. Abby cut him off, grabbing a set of keys from a hook by the door. The community center van is faster. I know these streets better than any driver you could call. For a heartbeat, Bill looked like he might argue, his instinct to take control warring with the recognition of her expertise. Then he nodded. I'm coming with you. They raced through intensifying rain to an aged van parked nearby. Abby slid behind the wheel while Bill jumped into the passenger seat, neither speaking as she navigated flooded streets with the skill of someone who'd lived with their treachery all her life. The scene at the lower section was chaos. Water already, ankle-deep and rising, makeshift shelters threatening to collapse as residents struggled to save what little they possessed. Without hesitation, Bill waded into the flood alongside Abby, helping families into the van, carrying children through. Deepening water, his expensive watch and remaining vestiges of CEO Polish forgotten in the urgency of the moment. There's a woman still inside that blue shelter, an elderly man informed them as they loaded his wife into the crowded van. Rosa Garcia. She's 8 months pregnant and refused to leave without her family photos. Before Abby could move, Bill was already splashing toward the structure, now surrounded by water nearly knee-deep. I'll get her, he called over his shoulder. You keep loading the others. Abby watched him disappear into the shelter, her heart in her throat. This wasn't the calculated charity of a billionaire with a savior complex. This was raw courage, a man risking himself for strangers simply because help was needed. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Bill emerged, supporting a heavily pregnant woman while clutching a plastic bag of water-damaged photographs to his chest. As they struggled toward the van, a surge of floodwater knocked them sideways. Bill reacted instantly, stabilizing the woman while deliberately taking the brunt of the impact himself. By the time they reached the vehicle, his left side was scraped raw from collision with debris, blood mixing with rain and mud on his torn shirt. Yet his focus remained entirely on getting Rosa safely aboard, his own injuries seemingly forgotten. With the van filled beyond capacity, Abby navigated carefully back to higher ground, the community center their destination. In the passenger seat, Bill made calls, his commanding tone organizing emergency shelters, food, medical care and supplies without waiting for government bureaucracy to catch up. The northwest entrance to the neighborhood is completely flooded, Abby reported as they approached an intersection. We'll have to detour through Parkside. No good, countered an older resident from the back. The construction on Maple has that road blocked too. Bill looked up from his phone, studying the rain-blurred streets ahead. What about Dixon Avenue through the warehouse district? Abby shot him a surprised glance. It was a local cut-through, known only to neighborhood residents. How do you know about that route? A shadow of vulnerability crossed Bill's face. I lived in a shelter on Westmore for 6 months when I was 15. Dixon was the fastest way to get to school without dealing with the gangs on Maple. The casual revelation, so at odds with Victoria's portrayal of him as a privileged voyeur into poverty, silenced the van. Abby felt another piece of her heart surrender as she took the turn onto Dixon, watching Bill from the corner of her eye. He'd never shared this specific detail before, yet it explained his genuine understanding of the community's challenges, his instinctive respect for their resilience. At the community center, organized chaos reigned as volunteers worked to accommodate the sudden influx of displaced residents. Bill moved through the crowd with natural authority, not commanding but coordinating, connecting his corporate resources with local knowledge to maximize effectiveness. When a doctor finally insisted on examining his injured side, he acquiesced, only after ensuring all the evacuees had been seen first. "It needs stitches," the doctor informed him, examining the gash along his ribs. "Do what's necessary," Bill replied, his eyes seeking Abby across the room where she distributed dry clothes and blankets. Their gazes locked, and Abby felt the same electric recognition that had charged the air between them since that first night in the abandoned warehouse. This man, bloodied, muddied, stripped of corporate armor, was the real Bill Brown. Not the cliché Victoria had painted, not the billionaire CEO of magazine covers, but a survivor who understood what it meant to fight your way forward against overwhelming odds. As the storm intensified outside, transforming streets into rivers and bringing back nightmarish memories of the flood that had first connected them, Abby moved purposefully across the room to where Bill sat, wincing slightly. As the doctor cleaned his wound, "Why did you really come today?" she asked softly, needing to hear the truth directly from him. Bill looked up, his blue eyes clear and direct despite the pain. "Because I missed you," he said simply. "Because my life doesn't make sense without you in it. Because I needed you to see me. Not what Victoria said about me, not what the tabloids printed, but me." The raw honesty in his voice struck deeper than any practiced declaration could have. In that moment, surrounded by crisis, yet somehow cocooned in a bubble of private truth, Abby recognized the decision before her, to trust or not to trust, to risk heartbreak for the chance at something extraordinary. "I spoke with Jennifer," she said quietly. Something like hope flickered across Bill's face. "And?" "She said you called her, asked her to tell me the truth." Abby's eyes never left his. "You've never done that before, according to her." "Never cared enough about what an ex thought to make that call." Bill nodded, vulnerability evident in the gesture. "Because I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Whatever mistakes I've made, and God knows I've made them, what we shared on that island wasn't one of them. What I said to you there was the truth, Abby." Before she could respond, a crash of thunder shook the building, the lights flickering ominously before stabilizing. "The backup generator won't last long in this weather," warned the site coordinator, approaching them with evident concern. "If the main power goes, we lose the pumps keeping water out of the east wing. We've got elderly and children sheltering there." The personal moment fractured as reality reasserted itself. Bill straightened, his expression shifting to focused determination despite his injury. "What do you need?" "Industrial pumps, the kind used in major construction." The coordinator's tone suggested he knew the request was nearly impossible given the emergency conditions. "I have them," Bill replied, without hesitation. 3 buildings under development across the city, all with industrial pumping systems. "I'll have them here within the hour." "Roads are flooding," Abby pointed out. "How will you transport them?" Bill was already dialing his phone. "Helicopters. 2 of our buildings have helipads. We'll airlift what's needed." As he strode away to coordinate the effort, Abby felt a swell of emotion that transcended the lingering doubts Victoria had planted. This was the man she'd fallen for, decisive in crisis, generous without hesitation, using his power not for self-aggrandizement, but because he could help when others couldn't. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency coordination. Bill's helicopters arrived as promised, delivering not just pumps, but additional supplies, equipment, and personnel. Working together, Abby and Bill moved through the community center with synchronized purpose, their previous connection resurfacing in the way they anticipated each other's needs without discussion. When the main power finally failed near midnight, the backup systems Bill had arranged kicked in seamlessly. Children who had been frightened by the darkness cheered as emergency lights illuminated the shelter. An elderly woman grasped Bill's hand as he checked on her comfort, her weathered fingers gentle against his calloused palm. "You're not what I expected," she told him with the blunt honesty of age, "from what they say in the papers." Bill's smile held a touch of sadness. Most of us aren't, if people look beyond the headlines. Later, as the storm began to abate in the early morning hours, Abby found Bill standing alone by a window, watching the slow recession of floodwaters. Exhaustion lined his face, his injured side clearly paining him, despite the doctor's care. Yet something in his stance spoke of peace amid chaos. "Your helicopter crew is standing by to evacuate anyone needing medical care once daylight comes," she said, coming to stand beside him. "The coordinator says your pumps probably saved the East Wing." Bill nodded, his eyes still on the gradually emerging landscape outside. "This neighborhood deserves better infrastructure. The city has neglected it for decades. Hence your $50 million investment," Abby observed, "the one that followed my exact proposals." He turned to face her then, no defense or pretense in his expression. "Your ideas were brilliant. Just because you left didn't mean they shouldn't be implemented." A pause, weighted with unspoken emotion. "I hoped you might see it as evidence that I valued your mind, your vision, not just my body," Abby finished when he faltered. "Not just the novelty of the slum girl?" Pain flashed across his features. "You were never that to me, Abby. Never a novelty, never a project or pattern. You were, the woman who changed everything." The raw honesty in his voice resonated with her own truth. Through all the doubts and confusion Victoria had sown, one reality had remained constant. No one had ever made Abby feel the way Bill did, seen, respected, desired, not despite her background, but with full acknowledgement of how it had shaped her strength. "When I left," she said softly, "I needed to know I could stand on my own. That I hadn't become dependent on what you provided, the apartment, the job, the lifestyle." "And now?" Bill asked, the question fragile with hope. Abby took a deliberate step toward him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Now I know I can survive without you. I just don't want to." The simple declaration hung between them, profound in its implications. Bill's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle after hours of crisis management and physical labor. "Victoria manipulated both of us," he said, his voice low and intense. "She used truths twisted into lies, exploited your natural fears and my past mistakes. But she was right about one thing. I am damaged by my childhood, by abandonment and years in the system." His honesty disarmed her final defenses. "We're all damaged in some way," Abby replied, her own hand coming up to cover his. "The question is whether we let it define us." The first light of dawn filtered through the window, illuminating them in gentle gold as the storm finally released its grip on the neighborhood. Outside, community members were already emerging to assess damage and begin cleanup, their resilience a testament to human capacity for renewal after devastation. "I love you, Abby Gomez," Bill said, the declaration simple yet profound in the quiet moment. Not as a savior or saved, not as CEO and employee, just as a man who found something he never thought possible, someone who sees him exactly as he is and chooses him anyway. Tears welled in Abby's eyes, the emotional barriers of recent weeks finally crumbling entirely. "I love you too," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Enough to walk away when I needed clarity. Enough to come back. Now that I have it." When their lips finally met, the kiss held none of the desperate passion of their island encounters or the controlled desire of their early days. Instead, it carried something deeper. Tender recognition of damage survived, honest acknowledgement of flaws accepted, and the profound commitment to build something enduring from the wreckage of past storms. Outside, the community they both cared for in different ways began the process of rebuilding, just as they would rebuild trust between them, one careful, intentional step at a time. What neither could know, as dawn broke over the neighborhood where their journey had begun, was that the greatest test of their renewed commitment still awaited. Victoria's vindictive campaign had planted seeds that would soon bear poisonous fruit, threatening not just their relationship, but Bill's entire empire and Abby's hard-won reputation. The storm might have passed, but the true deluge was yet to come. Chapter 10. Claimed forever. 1 month after the second devastating flood, Abby stood on the balcony of Bill's penthouse, watching the sun set over a city that seemed reborn. Below, the impoverished neighborhoods were transforming, not through gentrification that would displace residents, but through thoughtful development that preserved community while improving infrastructure. The media storm that had followed Victoria's vicious campaign had finally subsided. Her credibility had collapsed when Jennifer and Sophia both came forward, breaking their NDAs to defend Bill and expose Victoria's manipulations. The tabloids had quickly pivoted to portray Bill and Abby as a modern fairy tale, the abandoned orphan who built an empire, finding love with the determined woman who never forgot her roots. Reality, as always, was more complex and infinitely more precious than any simplistic narrative. "Penny for your thoughts," Bill's voice came from behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he pressed a kiss to the sensitive spot below her ear. Abby leaned back against his solid warmth, savoring the security of his embrace. "Just thinking about how much has changed. The neighborhood. Us. Regrets?" he asked, the question containing none of the insecurity it might have held weeks ago. She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "Only that I let Victoria make me doubt what I knew in my heart." The month since their reconciliation during the flood had been a journey of rebuilding, not just physical structures, but trust between them. They'd spoken honestly about their fears, Abby's concern about dependency, Bill's terror of abandonment. They'd established boundaries that respected her need for autonomy while acknowledging his need for connection. Most importantly, they'd learned to communicate with a raw honesty that transcended the passion that still blazed between them whenever they touched. "I have something to show you," Bill said, taking her hand and leading her inside. On the dining table lay architectural plans alongside legal documents. Abby recognized the location immediately, the heart of her old neighborhood, where the worst flood damage had occurred. "What is this?" she asked, scanning the detailed drawings of a modern community center surrounded by mixed-income housing. "The Eliza Gomez Memorial Foundation," Bill answered, watching her face carefully. "Named after your mother. If you approve." Emotion tightened Abby's throat as she examined the plans. The foundation would provide educational scholarships, small business loans, and housing assistance to the community where she'd grown up, all structured as partnerships rather than charity, empowering residents rather than creating dependency. "This isn't just my project," Bill continued when she remained speechless. "It's designed to be jointly led, equal partners." Abby looked up, understanding the profound significance behind his words. This man who controlled billions, who had built an empire through fierce independence, was offering true partnership, not just in this foundation, but in life. "Bill," she began, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gesture. "Before you answer," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, "there's something else." Abby's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a perfect sapphire the color of a stormy sky, set in platinum with smaller diamonds surrounding it like captured raindrops. "This isn't because of the foundation," Bill clarified, his eyes never leaving hers. "The timing is deliberate, to show you that these are separate choices. You could accept one without the other." He took the ring from its box, but didn't kneel, instead standing before her as an equal. "I love you, Abby Gomez, not as a project or a novelty, but as the extraordinary woman who saw past my walls to the abandoned boy still hiding behind them, who challenges me to be better while accepting my flaws, who showed me that real strength isn't about control, but about vulnerability. Tears blurred Abby's vision as he continued, his voice deepening with emotion. I want to build a life with you, not in my world or yours, but in one we create together. Will you marry me? The answer required no thought, rising from a place of absolute certainty within her. Yes, she whispered, extending her hand. To all of it. The foundation, marriage, our life together. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the perfect fit seemed symbolic of how they'd come to align despite their different beginnings. Abby pulled him to her, sealing their commitment with a kiss that quickly ignited into something more urgent, more primal. Without breaking their connection, Bill lifted her into his arms, carrying her to their bedroom. The gentleness of recent weeks gave way to something more possessive as he laid her on the bed, his eyes darkening with intent. I want to claim you, he growled against her throat, the words sending shivers of anticipation through her body. Make you mine in every way possible. I've been yours since that first night in the warehouse, Abby confessed, her hands already working at the buttons of his shirt. I just needed time to accept it. Their clothes fell away with urgent need, hands relearning territories they'd memorized yet never tired of exploring. Bill's mouth traced a burning path down her body, pausing to worship her breasts before continuing lower. Abby arched beneath his skilled attention, her release coming quickly and intensely under his determined ministrations. I need you inside me, she gasped, as the aftershock still pulsed through her. Now, Bill. He moved up her body, positioning himself between her thighs. Look at me, he commanded softly. I want to see your eyes when I claim you. Abby's gaze locked with his as he thrust forward, filling her completely in one powerful movement that drew synchronized moans from them both. The connection transcended physical pleasure, souls recognizing each other, damaged pieces fitting together to create something whole. Mine, Bill whispered as he began to move within her. Forever mine. Yours, Abby agreed, her body rising to meet each thrust, as you are mine. Their lovemaking built like a gathering storm, intensity mounting, with each synchronized movement. When release finally claimed them, it crashed through their joined bodies with devastating power, tearing cries from their throats as pleasure bordered on the transcendent. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the connection between them palpable. Even as their heartbeats gradually slowed, Bill's fingers traced lazy patterns on her skin, his expression one of profound contentment. When do you want to get married? He asked, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Abby smiled, thinking of the neighborhood. Still rebuilding, the foundation just taking shape. After the community center is completed, I want to celebrate there, with both our worlds coming together. Bill nodded, understanding the symbolism of her choice. Perfect. Though legally, I'll make you my wife tomorrow if you'll let me. The casual mention of legal marriage caused Abby to prop herself up on one elbow, studying his face. Why the rush? Something vulnerable flickered in Bill's eyes. Because I've spent my life belonging to no one, having no one belong to me. I want that certainty, that claim. The admission, raw in its need, touched Abby deeply. This powerful man, who commanded an empire with casual authority, still carried the abandoned child's desperate desire for permanent connection. Tomorrow then, she agreed softly, legally, and later we'll have the celebration our community deserves. Joy transformed his features, making him look younger, unburdened. He pulled her back into his arms, his kiss a promise more binding than any legal document could provide. 6 months later, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold, Abby stood in a simple white gown beside the newly completed Eliza Gomez Memorial Center. Before her, Bill waited beneath an arch of tropical flowers, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him along a path lined with residents from her old neighborhood, mingled with colleagues from his corporate world. Their legal marriage had remained a private matter, a quiet ceremony at City Hall, followed by an intense weekend, secluded in his, now their, penthouse. This public celebration was different, a statement about the worlds they were bridging, the communities they were uniting. The contrast between their first meeting during a violent storm and this perfect, calm evening seemed a fitting metaphor for their journey. From chaos to clarity, from mistrust to absolute faith, from two damaged souls to a unified whole greater than its parts. As Abby reached Bill's side, he took her hands in his eyes reflecting emotions too profound for words. The vows they exchanged were simple but powerfully honest, promises not of perfection but of perseverance, not of flawless harmony but of faithful partnership through whatever storms life might bring. When they sealed their union with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered community. Slum residents and corporate executives alike united in celebration of a love that transcended boundaries of class and circumstance. Later, as they danced beneath stars appearing in the twilight sky, Bill held Abby close, his lips brushing her ear. "Happy?" he asked, the word carrying all his lingering vulnerability. Abby looked up at the man who had claimed her body, her heart, her future. The man whose damage complemented her own to create something stronger, more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. "Beyond happiness," she answered. "This is belonging, this is home." As he bent to capture her lips in a kiss that promised pleasures to come later in the privacy of their bedroom, Abby knew with unshakable certainty that she had found her sanctuary. Not in a luxury apartment or a Caribbean island, but in the arms of a man who saw her completely, strengths and flaws, past and potential, and loved her not despite, but because of the sum of all she was. The girl from the slums had indeed become a woman, not because a powerful man had claimed her, but because together they had claimed something infinitely more precious, the courage to love without reservation, to trust beyond doubt, to build a future where both their worlds could thrive side by side. In the end, theirs was not a story of rescue but of recognition. Two souls who had survived abandonment and hardship, finding in each other not just passion, but home. A sanctuary not built of walls and wealth, but of understanding and acceptance. A love not defined by where they had come from, but by where they would go together. And as night fell fully over the celebration, stars illuminating the path ahead, Bill and Abby slipped away from the crowds, eager to begin the next chapter of their journey, claimed at last by a love powerful enough to weather any storm.
Thanks for watching!